Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Circle Elite Executive Roundtable. Future of Long-Term Care, Alternative Models of Practice, featuring Open Minds Vice President Sarah Elliott. My name is Corey Thornton. I'm the Vice President of Market Intel at Open Minds. Ms. Elliott brings over 10 years of experience in the health and human services field to the Open Minds team with expertise in gerontology, long-term and transitional care, and marketing and referral development. She will also be joined a little later by Steve Graber, founder of the Graduated Hope and managing partner with the Mountain Care Coalition. Today, Ms. Elliott will discuss alternative models in long-term care, technology and innovations in long-term care, and how to develop and sustain those new models of care. Before we get started, I have a couple of announcements. If you have any questions during the session, please submit them using the question feature on GoToWebinar, and Sarah will answer them. And I also want to let you know that the recording and deck from today will be made available on the Open Minds website starting early next week. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Sarah Elliott.
Great, thanks, Corey. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. It's great to be here to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, the future of long-term care and alternative models of practice. It's an area of passion of mine, and I'm really happy to share some of what I've come across over the years and what I hope to see for our future. So as Corey said, Steve will hopefully be joining us here shortly. And he'll be talking to us about one model that I'm really excited about here in Colorado, which is where I'm joining you all from. So today, we are going to chat about some technology and innovation and how that weaves throughout some of these new models of care. I'll go over a few learning objectives before that, of course, and then we'll get into my favorite topic, which is the social-led sustainable communities and how we've come about, looking at some of those through the framework of AARP's Livability communities. So that'll be really exciting. And then we'll talk a little bit about funding and policy recommendations. Now, some of these are a little bit more Colorado-based, but these are certainly applicable in many states. And so I am excited to share that piece with you, as well as talking about the shift overall that we're seeing right now in the healthcare landscape going into home and community-based services and sort of where that puts the future of long-term care. The learning objectives today, I think you all saw probably prior to joining us, the alternative models that we'll be talking about, the tech and innovation in long-term care potentially, and then how to develop and sustain these new models of care, because there's some really exciting organizations out there that are doing this already within the framework where the current landscape lies, but there is certainly room for opportunity and a lot of area for discussion for the future. So we'll go over a little bit of that as well. But to start, I want to talk about why we need these changes in the first place. That's where we have to look at where we've come to see where we'd like to go. Many of you who may or may not be familiar with long-term care, at least in the more traditional sense and the more institutionalized sense, is that model of skilled nursing facility, nursing home, things of that nature. But we're really starting to see that that needs to shift, especially as we see the confluence of the addition of behavioral health and mental health needs. So institutionalized long-term care model provides housing and care, round-the-clock nursing care, et cetera, to aging adults. However, this model has long been in need of reform and change, and there's some organizations out there that are doing a great job with it for what they're given. But then there's some organizations that have a long way to go. And if anything, the pandemic really heightened, what those needs and changes should be. So essentially, for those of you who don't know, these facilities were really a holding place for those that were destitute. And later on, when many of our state hospital systems actually closed, a lot of these folks did not have anywhere to go and ended up often in this type of system. And so they ended up in nursing facilities. And nursing facilities were never really created to have this level of care that they're currently facing. So a lot of our more traditional, Medicaid funded long-term care buildings really have become, and I hate to use the word warehouse, but that's truly what they had become, as far as those that could not afford, the beautiful new SNFs, the skilled nursing facilities and assisted livings that you oftentimes see popping up on every corner, it seems. And so, there's a real health disparity between those two populations, which is where you start seeing some of the splitting of care. You see these short-term rehab buildings that are quote unquote Medicare buildings for those of us in the biz. And, those are the folks that really do, they're coming out of ortho issues, but they may also have some co-occurring medical issues that they need to take care of, and so they've ended up in skilled nursing facilities. But then, after their 20-day Medicare benefit is up, they're kicked out, they're moved on, whatever the case may be. And then that's where you see some of our Medicaid buildings, for lack of a better term, but just some of those long-term nursing homes that really have created really a further gap in care, even though, it seems like, oh, this is just a step down, or this could just be a rehab and then the person will go home. These folks that end up there often end up staying there, and then losing their houses in the community and things like that. So just my own personal plea as a gerontologist that we need to do better, and caring for our older adult population, but also keeping in mind that the population and demographics in these buildings have shifted considerably to now include quite a few folks with behavioral health and mental health needs as well. And so you're starting to see a very big mix of the population. Gone are the pink sweater days of the folks that are sitting there quietly in their wheelchair, just, kind of hanging out. And so, those folks are staying home. And now we're seeing more complex care needs for the individuals that are entering the nursing facilities. And so it's a multitude of complex issues that come to a head when you're looking at long-term care. So we need some reform, we need some change. So I'd like to talk a little bit about technology and innovation first. And I lead with this because, and I also want to caveat the fact that I say long-term care, I would like us to not think of that as sort of the traditional nursing home, but really look at it as a continuum of care that goes beyond just the nursing facility, but actually in the home, in different care settings, assisted livings, I-SNPs, which are, more medical model, things of that nature. But the reason I bring technology and innovation into this is because you can't have one without the other. You absolutely need to advent any number of solutions that could go into reforming what we think of as long-term care, because it can really help address a lot of the issues that we're facing, such as workforce shortage, complex needs in individuals, data and metrics that we need to be measuring to inform better partnerships. There's a whole slew of things, and I'll share our data. I'll share our technology framework slide here in just a few moments, but I just wanted to highlight a few things to think about as we go through these. There's some really exciting stuff that's happening in the world of older adults. Aging 2.0 is a great organization, and through them they have chapters all across the world, and they've really worked to utilize some startup companies, whether they have a solution, whether they have whether it's AI, whether it's an actual device, things of that nature. They really highlighted their entrepreneurship in residency program with skilled nursing facilities. And so they marry and match companies that are kind of starting to get their foot in their door, but they really need to pilot what they like to do. And so identifying communities that they can work with in the skilled nursing facility landscape, and then partnering those two together to really create a really nice partnership and pilot to see if that actually helps. And so they kind of help one another. Usually the benefits are pretty great for those individuals living in the facilities, but then also the companies that are trying to get their company off the ground, because then they have this invaluable resource of older adults that are able to inform sort of how they hope their product and or program to exist. And forgive my dog in the background. I think we're all used to this now with all these remote options. There's no stopping if he's a beagle. Anyway, back to SNF at home, hospital at home. I think you all have probably heard these terms, and probably they will not be going away anytime soon. Really changing the landscape of the level of care that we're able to provide, both in the home setting as well as in the assisted living, independent living, those types of older adult population living settings. So really trying to bring the care to the individual rather than the individual to the care. So I think we will continue to see, obviously, a big sharp change in that. I want to point out that the technology and innovation in long-term care does not always have to be big. These can be very small changes. These can be something as simple as a workflow issue for nursing staff. I just want to highlight that when we talk about tech and innovation, I think the biggest thing everybody goes to is the very fancy robots. I mean, looking at LEQ and the thing that came out of the MIT aging labs. I mean, it's very exciting. It's a companion robot. It does all these things. and it's extremely expensive. But there's also other options out there that do not have to be so large and so big. And I think, you know, especially for executives of nursing facilities and healthcare companies, I think the worry becomes obviously the cost and how that is going to affect their staff and their residents. However, some of these options out there just really are meant to improve, because skilled nursing, as far as being on the totem pole, they're right there with behavioral health. They're sort of the last adopters. They're the last man on the totem pole when it comes to actually having access to the tech and innovation that they should. Obviously, reimbursement and managed care cannot be talked about in any setting without talking about tech and innovation, and that has a lot to do with the data and the analytics. And then, of course, the key partnerships that people are able to create for health plans. We've seen some interesting things happen in Colorado, specifically with capitated rates and things of that nature, but then also just narrowing of networks. So really something to consider when you're looking at tech and innovation options. There's also remote patient monitoring. Obviously, that's a hot topic, but you know, a lot of people are really focused on their EHR and other needs, because the remote patient monitoring seems so far off. But this is going to be key, especially as we see this marrying of long-term care in conjunction with home and community-based services, as well as home health, hospice, palliative, all of those types of care settings that are done in the home. So I think we'll see a huge increase in that over the next 5 to 10 years. And then a patient engagement. I mean, I can't stress it enough. That's why I put it twice. You know, I think a long time coming as far as asking our complex consumers to participate in their care. They want to have autonomy. They want to have involvement. And so the more we can keep them engaged in their care, the better outcomes we can all have for them. And this ties directly into chronic disease management. When we're looking at diabetes, CHF, some of those big diagnoses that require, you know, quite a bit, you know, making sure that somebody has something as simple as a scale in their home if they have CHF. I mean, these are the types of things that it seems like a big, scary topic, tech and innovation, but really it comes down to getting to know the individual and learning what they can have access to that helps inform their care delivery. And then also looking at other country models and what they're doing. And, you know, I won't get into the weeds too far with that, but I think, you know, quite a few countries, Japan, Israel, you know, a lot of countries out there that are doing this and doing this well in adoption of tech and innovation within the long-term care setting. This is our lovely tech platform framework that some of you who have attended some of our institutes have started to see. This was just rolled out at our technology and analytics and our technology and innovation. Yeah, I had it right. Technology and Analytics Institute in October. So this is new, but it certainly lays it out here for you, and looking at both sides, looking at integrated data and analytics for informing your decision making, and then your service performance optimization and how that occurs. So all 5 of these areas being really important when you're looking at that tech and data solution to innovate some new stuff in your care setting. So we'll make sure you all have these slides available to you after the presentation. And now we're going to move into my favorite topic, as I mentioned, social-led sustainable communities. This is an effort that I've been really focused on over the past 5 years here in Colorado, but certainly in other settings as well. And so I'm hoping that we continue to see the trend moving in this direction. Through my involvement in the Strategic Action Planning Group on Aging, these are some of the recommendations that actually will be presented shortly, and I think can be broadly applied across our country. I mean, this idea of a social-led sustainable community is not new. I'll just say that, and you know, at risk of putting myself in any one category, you know, I think people get a little turned off by the word social. But truly what that means is that this is a community, and developing care settings or models of living in our communities that are socially led. A lot of times what we're finding, especially with older adults, is not that, you know, that they really need this high level of care and so they end up in skilled nursing. It's usually very simple things that they just don't know how to have access to or don't have access to. And so then they end up more dependent than interdependent and end up in a higher care setting that is necessary. So we're really looking at some of these new models, and we call them models of living, and I call them models of living because it's truly what it is. It's not just for our aging population. I mean, we're all aging, obviously, but this can be applied more broadly to other people living with chronic conditions and major mental illness even, because people need to thrive in community. They need other people, and too often we are siloing ourselves off from the greater good, from the greater community. And so we're not able to utilize some of that necessary social network and connection that we actually need to thrive. You know, as simple as somebody needing their driveway shoveled or groceries. We've even seen some innovative things even out of the Nextdoor app, where seniors can post on Nextdoor saying, hey, I need help with this, or you can offer up your services, which is a really cool thing. You can say, hey, I'm a helpful household. If you need me to run to the store for you, or if you need somebody to come walk your dog, or, you know, little things like that, that really help support that person's level of independence. So you see some really interesting things happening there informally, but hoping that we can continue to support through legislation, funding, availability, et cetera, to make sure that this continues to happen. So this form of innovation, it supports independence, it provides access to services and supports, and then allows for the development and sustainment of social connection, which we know is key to aging successfully, whether or not you have a chronic or behavioral health need as well. These social-led communities are all based on the 8 domains of livability. This is through the AARP, of course. So again, the tilt is toward older adults, but a lot of these concepts can be applied to those living with chronic conditions and major mental illness as well at times. So looking at these 8 domains of livability become important for housing, outdoor spaces and buildings, transportation, communication and information, civic participation and employment, respect and social inclusion, health services and community supports, and social participation. And you all can see that that's a public option there for AARP, but just so you're kind of seeing the foundation of everything that we see these social-led components happening from. So talking about some of my fun models, and I'm going to turn it over to Steve here in just a few moments, but first I want to talk about some of the things that are out there and some of these companies that are doing some really exciting things. So the Village Cooperative, I believe they're based out of Minnesota or Missouri, I'm unfortunately blanking, but this cooperative model that allows for more affordable homeownership of apartments. This is 62 plus, so it is specifically focused on the older adult, but really, again, it's that social model. Any of these, you can look them up there. They're just outstanding things and doing some really cutting edge stuff. Calamos, and I didn't include on here also the greenhouse homes. If anybody is familiar with the work of Dr. Bill Thomas, he's the founder of the Eden Alternative, which aimed to combat loneliness, helplessness, and boredom in the skilled nursing facilities setting. It's come a long way since then. That was based on his own 2 daughters who have become elders to him, as he calls them, and how they were born with life-altering conditions, but really they have become great teachers to him, as well as the fact that he, as an emergency room physician, would go into these communities and find people just sort of warehoused. It was still the time of tying people up, things of that nature, and really just thought we have to do better. And so he's quite an innovator, quite a great thinker, and has developed all of these really amazing concepts over the years. One of the more famous ones now that has taken off across the country is the greenhouse home model, which is really focused on those living with Alzheimer's and dementia and cognitive challenges, and creating communities where people are actually living in houses, and then the universal worker, the Shabazim, comes to their home and assists them with tasks of daily living, what we would call tasks of daily living, or ADLs, and has allowed for them to successfully age in a community versus, you know, a more traditional model of a warehouse type of institutional skilled nursing facility. And the level of care is still there should they need it. But what they're finding is that, you know, if you can meet some of these social needs, then that higher level of care kind of goes away until much later, unless they have a very serious chronic condition. Calamos is his newest project. They're developing in Pennsylvania and Texas and Colorado, I believe, new connected and small dwelling communities with communal caregiving component. I encourage you to go check it out. It's a pretty fantastic model, very similar I won't say commune because I fear of saying that, but seriously trying to create these idealistic communities where people can thrive and live together intergenerationally, providing social structure and support to one another. And then if they need that advanced level of nursing care, that comes later. Everything else is focused on first before we jump to the medical model. And so that's the exciting thing that's really happening with Calamos. And they've worked well with, the Housing Authority and things like that. I'm going to skip over Steve's because he's going to talk about it in a minute, the Mountain Care Coalition and Graduated Hope communities that he's creating here in Colorado, which are really exciting, and I'm excited to share with you. And then Open Arms ALF, another just example of getting creative with the resources we have. In this country, we have a lot of buildings that are, can potentially be retrofitted, which is exactly what these folks aim to do by creating assisted livings in old churches and schools. So that's pretty exciting and different model of sort of retrofitting and then going in, changing the physical environment to create a more smart home environment, and then being able to serve those in assisted living at a lower cost because they're actually utilizing Medicaid waivers as well. So that's kind of an innovative thing that's happening out here. So with that said, I believe Steve has joined us. So I'm going to turn things over to him to talk. I've got a few slides for him. He's just doing some really incredible stuff and comes from a different space. And so having history as a nursing home administrator and then moving into the real estate and development side of things and investor side of things, he's really kind of turned the model on his head. And so I'll let him speak to you a little bit about the different populations that they're serving. And Steve, you just tell me when. Next slide, I'll drive for you.
Sounds good. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
I can, yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, so we are working on a kind of a unique model. We call it graduated hope. It's really a continuum of housing is the way we see this. There's such a need for people out there. And Sarah, if you could actually go to the next one. We're calling this program Graduated Hope, but if you wouldn't mind going to the next screen, what we're looking at is people that have had no chance to really get into a home at all right now. As you can see, throughout the United States, we are woefully short on affordable housing. I know even where we're at in Colorado, they've called it a crisis. And what is the path for people to find success? So here's what we have found, and we're working with all sorts of people coming from felon backgrounds, anything from trafficking. We're working with people that are aged out foster care. We're working with seniors. We're working with all sorts of people that just need that step and that next approach to be able to get them back on their feet and get them into a house. So we basically have three models, or we actually one model with three kind of steps that we're using, and this is that graduated step process. And we're going to start out with shared housing. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment in the next slides, but shared housing, moving then to a cottage, which isn't a tiny home, but a cottage where people can move into, usually around 500 to 1,000 square foot in size. And we're going to get them into something a little bit bigger, and then finally move them into a single family home. So it's that path to success that we're working very closely on. If you go to the next slide, Sarah, I'm going to share with them the shared housing model that really is the catalyst to healing. So let me know when you got that pulled up there. Yeah, thank you very much. So we have these are three homes that are kind of a prototype that we've been working on for the last in Colorado Springs for the last couple of years. Now, in this model, what we are doing is we do not rent out to people as tenants. What we're doing is we're renting out to people as guests in our home. And so again, it's not tenancy. What we're going to do is we're going to allow them to stay there as long as they want. The house that you're going to see, let me start with the sober living house on the left. It's called Jubilee House, a sober living home. There are basically 9 women that are living in this house that have struggled with addiction. And they're trying to find a way to get back on their feet again because nobody wanted to rent to them. We are willing to have them come into our home. They will pay rent, but we call it equal expense share, but we're not renting to them directly. We, as the investors, are renting out to that house as an LLC. It's a business. It's got its own bank account. It runs like a business. They basically are guests that are going to manage our business for us. And they can stay there, like I said, as long as they want. They want to stay there 20, 30 years, or they want to stay there 3 months. They can do any of that. But the things that we require of them is that we can't have any alcohol or drugs in the home. Secondly, there can't be any disruptive behavior. Third, they must always keep the house proper looking, show ready at any time. And then lastly, and the thing that really makes this work is they must attend a weekly meeting. The weekly meeting is the thing that allows them to be able to talk through house issues. We have, the meeting has about 12 steps, and they're going to go through who is doing what in the home. There are going to be some people, everyone each week has a job that they must do. One person's job may be to mow the lawn. One person's job may be to clean the bathrooms. Another person's job may be to clean the garage. Everyone has a job. And if you don't do your job, you can either be fined or you can work off that, whatever that might be. But we are actually lowering their cost of rent. So here in Colorado Springs, you know, if you're going to get a single, single room, it's going to be around, you're probably going to pay $1,200 roughly for a like single bedroom to a double bedroom. We're having them paying $650 a month. And so $650 a month goes into this pool with which the house will have in the bank account, and then they will pay the investor. So because there's 9 women in that house on the left, we're raising $5,850 per month in rent. Normally, that's going to be normally that would be like a $2,100 in rent. We're collecting $5,850. Just below that, you'll see the monthly rent. What the investors are getting paid is $3,700. So instead of making $2,100, they make it $3,700, and the reserve amount is going to be $2,150, and that stays for the home. They manage the amount of money that's left in the home, so they will pay the bills. They will pay. They'll pay the landlord if they want to buy Hulu or Netflix, whatever. They can choose to do this. This is their home to manage, but there is some oversight. What we do is we simply bring people in. If somebody can't live there anymore, no problem. Like in a case of sober living, we will fill it with somebody else immediately. And with evictions, we can ask somebody to leave at any time as well. But we want people to heal. We want people to get back on their feet again. And so we not only did we do that with the sober living home, then you see that middle home, the veterans home, we did the same thing with that. These are all veterans. They'll be all males, all females, all men and children, or all women and children. But they will work together in cooperation in that house. They get a chance to manage the house. They will work together and they will heal together. And then the one we have on the right is a felon-friendly house. It actually happens to be an offender house. Again, nobody wants to run out to the felons. Nobody wants to, and people and veterans are having a hard time getting on their feet because it's so expensive to get a house. Well, here they can afford $650 a month. That isn't hard for them at all. But again, we will have a stepped approach. If you go to the next slide there, Sarah, I want to say, after someone has been there for a long time, we are now starting to do new builds. So these new builds, we're actually building communities where we know that model works. It's been around since 1974, but we're taking this model that we know it's worked and putting it on steroids. We're going to now do new builds, and there'll be 8 bedrooms in a home with a living, dining, and kitchen area, all that people can share. Again, the more they can share together, the better they do. In the case of aging, this is great for them. So if in the case of aging, they can share home care costs with each other. So maybe instead of paying $26 an hour for someone themselves, they get to share it among one another. So it really works for everyone. If you can go to the next slide, Sarah, I want to show everyone what we're really putting together. We are building subdivisions now where we have not only community within the homes, but we have a community where people can see that next step. We are developing cottages on the outside and then shared living spaces on the inside with a community center right at the hub. The community center is what brings everyone together. This could be a church on Sunday. This could be a community center for childcare. This could be a gym. All those things, counseling offices, all takes place right in the middle of the community. The next level out where you see FF and all that, those are felon-friendly homes. This is one that we have designed, and we have FWA, stands with Friends Without an Address. So these are homes for the homeless. All of them will work together within their own home, but what are they going to do once they've been together in that environment, community environment within the home for a long time? Now they need to move to that next step, which is going to be those single family units on the outside, which is going to be a cottage. So they get a chance to save money, put money away, and then we will move them in with a lease option into those cottages on the outside. Again, bigger than a tiny home, and then we can move them into a single family home. So that is really the step of what we're doing. And Sarah, I appreciate what you're doing here. We are trying to pull all this together so that we can make it a win-win for everyone. The investors are going to win because they're going to make nearly twice as much money. People are going to win inside the homes because they're going to pay nearly half the amount, and nonprofits are going to win because they don't have to focus on the properties. They can just focus on their programs. In fact, there's so much money in this. With the investors, we're thinking about taking 10 to 20% of everything that they make and give it right back to nonprofits, because they're the ones that start bringing in the people for us anyway. That is the model of graduated hope, giving people a graduated path to success.
Thank you so much, Steve. We really appreciate that. I'm really excited to know Steve. I've come to know him through some of our work here in Colorado, and I just think what they're doing is absolutely very innovative, very cool, as especially, you know, because they're going to be able to access the care that people need and keep them in community, which is what we want, especially when we look at justice involved individuals trying to get back on their feet, people that are no longer, or people that are experiencing homelessness, being able to have a path towards home ownership and reintegration into the community. So really excited about all the things that he's doing. And I just wanted to share that with you, because I just thought when we first heard about what Steve was doing, I felt like I had to sing it from the rooftops. So how do we get into that? So coming back to some from those amazing models, we need to have supportive legislation to make it happen, as well as funding and policy recommendations that need to be supportive of those types of communities, and to be supportive of those social-led models. So some of the recommendations that we've been developing here in Colorado, but again, I think that can be obviously much more broadly applied across the country, is ensuring that funding remains accessible for area agencies on aging, excuse me, in order to support adult programming in the community. A lot of stuff gets filtered through the AAAs, and we certainly want to make sure that we support that, especially because as we start to look at health disparities and resources, the AAAs are often filling in the gaps for people that are not able to access other things. So certainly want to support aging in place of choice and or aging in community of choice, while also establishing that resources are allocated to address racial, geographic, economic, health, age-related, and gender disparities that exist in each community. That sounds like a big ask, but you know, these are the types of topics that, as far as getting involved with legislation and groups that are lobbying, senior lobby, as well as special interest groups. Resources should be diversified and developed and sustained to provide services in communities beyond what is offered by the AAAs. As I just said, the AAAs are great, but they can't do it all. Certainly want to encourage other ways of environmental changes. And when I say environmental, I mean our actual landscape of healthcare and housing. Developing policy focused on the assessment and mitigation of these disparities, through the development of common and universally applied metrics to ensure equitable distribution of resources. So, I mean, I know these are big asks and sort of high level overviews, but this is how it gets started. Certainly a project I used to work on, that I did work on, that was very exciting, was bringing together a number of agencies across the state that serve our most complex consumers and looking at alternative models. And these were some of our most complex consumers, but creating a pilot program with an existing skilled nursing facility to change things. For those of you who work in the field, you know, the federal regulations as well as the state regulations for skilled nursing facilities, we often joke that it's the highest regulated industry there is, and that's actually not really a joke anymore. I think nuclear plants and skilled nursing facilities are the most highly regulated. And some of that is good because changes did need to occur, as I mentioned earlier, but some of it we've gotten to the point of over-regulating things so that, you know, care gets lost somewhere in between. And so that's where some of these more creative models have come from, and hopefully will continue, so that we can continue to support people with the most complex needs. I do want to make sure we touch on, before we open up for questions, I want to make sure that we talk about the shift towards home care and community care. I cannot stress this enough. I'm not saying that the need for skilled nursing and or long-term care in its more traditional manner will go away. I certainly do not believe that. There are going to be individuals that will always need that level of care, but what that looks like as far as what kind of environment they're in and or what kind of model of clinical programming is available to them, I think that will continue to shift. but also knowing that people have a desire to stay in the community. As we know that the aging population is growing exponentially. I do not need to preach to the choir there. I won't call it the gray tsunami because I think that's a little ageist. However, you know, it's there, and our population has continued to grow, and it will stay steady. It may not continue to grow, as you hear about millennials only having one child or two children, but it will stay steady with the amount that we see now. And so making sure that the infrastructure and as well as the business models are there in the community to support that human community-based care. I'm sure many of you saw the $400 billion Biden measure that, you know, funneling that money into home and community-based care. And certainly, you know, I think we're going to continue to see a shift in the landscape. I was excited because I was just talking to some of my colleagues about the mergers, acquisitions, and affiliation summit that's coming up at one of our institutes in 2022. And I fully believe, because I just see it anecdotally here, but I know it's actually happening, is that we are seeing hospice. For a long time, we're seeing hospice companies pop up. It seemed like every 5 minutes there was a new hospice company. Well, now we're starting to see some of that shift into merging or shutting down or acquiring those businesses and coming together to really narrow those networks. And we're seeing the same thing with home health as well. And so with these shifts in funding and regulatory requirements, we need to allow for appropriate staffing. Of course, we need to look at reimbursement rates and specialized care education that's needed for people that are living with some of these comorbidities. Certainly the confluence of mental and behavioral health challenges with normal aging, aging-related diseases complicates things. And so when you're looking at very specialized populations, whether it's IDD, whether it's major mental illness, whatever the case may be, we're really, really needing some of that training to go along with the workforce, which I know is a huge issue. So certainly something that everybody's trying to get creative with here, but the hope is with that leading with a social led versus a clinical model, that some of those needs may actually disappear because the social pieces are in place. The changes in reimbursement rates for assisted living facilities, I mean, not to mention skilled nursing facilities, my hope is for each state that we can see this happen. I know it's a hard thing to lobby for and to recommend, but I encourage everyone to get involved as much as you possibly can, because what this ultimately does is it lessens the burden on the state system and then the counties, and then it delays and prevents individuals from ending up in nursing facilities, which are the costliest care setting in the first place. You know, with the Money Follows the Person initiative, the last 5 years, we saw the transitions programs coming state by state, and most of those states were extremely successful in getting people out of institutionalized care setting into a least restrictive environment. Many of those programs actually got written into the state plans for Medicaid, and certainly we will continue to see that shift happen as they want people to be in the least restrictive environment possible. So I am going to pause there. We do have some more resources on this, but Corey, I believe we were going to open it up for Q&A at this time.
Yes, we are. Thank you, Sarah. I want to also thank you, Steve. If Steve wants to come back on and help field these questions, that would be great. I'd like to hear what you both have to say about some of these. First question, when looking for providers to partner with, what are the criteria you look for and how do you narrow that down?
Oh, lovely. Well, certainly, I think, you know, if we're looking at this from a lens of the human and community-based services, trying to find organizations that you're partnering with and aligning with is making sure that your mission and your values are aligned. I would also argue, recently we heard a little bit from our Thai Institute about folks that were looking to broaden, and I think that broadening is great if you have, you know, the resources to do it. But if you're doing IDD services and you're doing it well, you need to find other providers that are doing that and really aligning your purposes and your care pathways together to make sure that you have a network of care both in the community and in more congregate care settings to meet those needs. And Steve, you might be in a little bit of a different place there, because you actually have folks that are in quote unquote their home. And so identifying people to come into that home can sometimes be a challenge. Oh, sorry guys, I need to skip ahead there. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think it's really kind of what you said. I think it's finding people that have the same mission and values as you mentioned, and we kind of have a vetting process both for people to come into our home, but also we're trying to look for the same people that really don't have even the end goal being money. Now, money is something that we want to have as part of it, but obviously, we want people that really understand the needs of the people that are in our homes. If they have a good understanding of that, then I think that's the kind of people we want to work with.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, that's great. Thank you very much. Well, speaking of money, at the end of March, the Biden administration announced the American Jobs Plan, which included a substantial increase in state Medicaid funding for home-based care. What do you see as the home-based and community-based services evolving into with the promise of what is touted as $4 billion?
You want to tackle that one first, Steve, and then I'll jump in, or either way?
Well, I don't know if you can. You're talking about the money that's come in. Can you ask that again, Corey?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the American Jobs Plan has promised $400 billion to home and community-based services. Where do you see the opportunity coming out of that? Where will those services evolve in the future if that kind of funding is going to come into the market?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to answer that as well, because I'm still kind of trying to process what that all means, because that's a lot of money that's coming in, and you want to make that money work. But I see it's again, I think this takes a lot of creativity from my perspective in how to actually implement that. And I think there are also all sorts of jobs that are available. I think we can actually put that into place. I know we've got some ideas of how we build jobs. But again, can we influx that money so that money almost multiplies itself? That's what I want to see happen, so that again, jobs are continue to grow and continue to promote more jobs. Sarah, I don't know if you want to add any more to that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think what we're going to see, especially, which I kind of just touched on a little bit, and pardon me, didn't sneeze, sorry. So basically, I envision in some of the conversations that I recently just had with Monica and some of the other folks here at Open Minds, is that we're going to see some of these smaller companies under 10 million or so. I think we're going to start to see some of those companies start to either merge or acquire one another to grow, because I think the splitting of resources has happened for so long, and especially in an area where, look at a home health company that's trying to cover a certain geographic area to meet the needs of their people and their population in there. But you've got somebody all the way 8 hours in a rural area, and then you've got to cover a metro area as well. That certainly becomes a workforce issue. But I don't know that just throwing money at the problem obviously is going to fix it. But I think we're going to start to see a little bit more strategic play out of exactly what services can and cannot be provided in the community. And so this is where that legislation and policy piece comes in. You have to be able to provide the care that you provide, but you can't, and you don't know what you don't know. And I hate to speak of generalities, but I think if we start to find those specialized niche populations that we're serving, we're also going to be able to identify areas within those home health companies, within those hospice companies, within the SNF at home, to really focus in on some of those chronic needs. And so I would love to see it, my pie in the sky idea with that money coming in is sort of a filtering through of looking at specific populations and what those needs are, and then that specialty education that comes from having an informed workforce then work in conjunction with that individual in that community. That was a roundabout way of saying we need to get specific with the money. However, I think if you filter it into different ways, especially with that SNF at home, hospital at home model, you're going to see companies like Dispatch Health that offers mobile care. You're going to see things like Bloom Healthcare, which offers, not only now are they offering a doc on call, physician house calls, but now they're offering a behavioral health, a social services person on staff to follow, to come into the home. I think you're going to see an expansion of some of our remote patient monitoring type of things, as well as patient engagement. I mean, it's both a good and a scary thing, and it's been part of our broader conversation at some of this policy level work that we've done, because we want to filter the money appropriately. And I think nobody knows exactly, nobody has a magic ball and can say, yes, this is where we should put the money into. But certainly, you know, some of the areas I mentioned as well, like area agency on aging, as far as making sure that they're supported and continue to have that funding support, as well as special interest groups like policy recommendations, so that they can actually inform how this money should be spent in order to help people remain in the community of their choice.
And one thing I think is that I'm seeing too, I'm seeing a lot of like community efforts that's already working. And I think, Sarah, you've been working on this for a while too, where you see things that are already working. And I think the money that's coming in, you want to put that money where things are already, you're seeing results. There's measurables. And so I think that's where I see things going eventually, because just having money won't solve it. But if you put money to where things are already working, that's where I want to see things go with the money I'm seeing from the Biden administration.
Yeah, that's a great point, Stephen. I think you bring up the salient point of making sure that, you know, the data is there and that you have measurable outcomes, right? So that, you know, you have this proven model that works, and you can go back to payers, providers, et cetera, and say, hey, we have a model that works. This is why we need the money here, because we have proven that it works. And so I absolutely 100% agree with you. Any other questions?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Steve. Yeah, so it's great to hear when things work, and it's great to be able to prove when things work. But on the other side of that, I have to ask, you know, what types of barriers and challenges do you foresee in attempting, you know, provider organization either attempting to break into this space or expand the service lines they have? If they, you know, they have a pocket full of new money and they want to expand and do something different, you know, what's the challenges they really have to keep their eye on?
Oh, the challenges are many. And I don't want to make this seem like a rosy, like, oh, we have this beautiful idea for this. And I think Steve was maybe part of some of those conversations that he and I have had at that policy recommendation level, because it's like, yeah, we can create a beautiful utopia in our minds. Like, this is how it goes. This is all the things it should have. Here's the check marks, right? But the reality is of that coming in, and I think one part of that conversation, and I know Steve and I have had in the past, is making sure that you do identify those barriers and challenges, because then that can then inform how you then navigate and how you can hopefully be proactive in entering those spaces. Steve, from somebody who just kind of, I mean, not to say that you're brand new at this, you've been doing it a long time, but, you know, what are some of the challenges you face? I know some housing and zoning stuff specifically for your model, but also, you know, I wonder, or, you know, I know that just the regulation side of things, I'll just briefly say that, you know, I know a few folks that have attempted to start a home health company and how they've had to wait forever for licensure and things like that, but also making sure that they have access to staff, and they were actually able to identify that very challenge and barrier ahead of time. So they actually built their model, for instance, and this is a skilled home health company that I'm talking about. They actually built their workforce first. So she built it with a loyal workforce of connections that she had made in the field, and it comes back to that mission, right? That kind of drives everything that you do. But she was able to identify, like, okay, I understand that workforce shortage is an issue. I'm going to make sure that I always have 2 RNs, I always have 2 PTs. And granted, things change and you get that, but if you can kind of be proactive in an area where you see that challenge ahead of time, you can hopefully mitigate some of the issues, pardon me, down the road, which is exactly what she was able to do with the home health side of things. I know from a housing authority and things, that kind of things, especially for people that are getting into that community-led model, that can bring on a whole other set of challenges, right, Steve?
That's true. And by the way, Sarah, Corey, are you guys hearing this too? The Sarah, yours all of a sudden really garbled with the microphone. Is anyone else hearing that, or is that just me?
Yes, I was going to say we had some comments come in about that. I believe it is with our GoToWebinar platform. It is a little bit garbled. I can still hear you, Sarah, but there's a slight robotic sound coming on the backside of it.
Sarah, maybe you could maybe just turn off your microphone and turn it back on, see if that clears it up. But you were fine till just about 2 minutes ago. Yes, so, you know, we always want the path of least resistance, and I think there are a lot of barriers, you know, that we're always fighting. One of the things I really appreciate, regulations, because you need to have those, but you also need to to make sure that it's not keeping you from accomplishing your mission. So, you know, we're always trying to figure out how because you need the regulations, so you need to balance that. And but again, we're always trying to look at what is the path of least resistance to try to really move things forward and make the mission happen. And I think a lot of it just takes a lot of creativity. So we're always trying to look for creative approaches, and it's there. It's there. I think if we just work on that. You know, one thing that we deal with all the time, again, is the permitting, as you mentioned, and I know that, again, when we need those, that the permitting needs to work, but how can we help even government or whatever also try to streamline the processes a little bit more and encourage that. There's some things you can control and things that you can't, but I find that usually with creativity that you can solve a lot of problems.
Yes, totally agree.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Sarah. Yes, Sarah, still getting a little bit of that. I can hear your voice though, so we only have a couple more minutes. I think we're going to power through. I apologize to everybody. I want to back it up just a little bit. Sarah, you had made comments that you don't see some of the current models necessarily going away, but what will happen to institutionalized care? And not to lead the jury too much here, but we talk a lot about hybrid services, what technology can offer, you know, hybrid in that sense, hybrid in the sense of going between face-to-face and in the community. You know, how is the old model going to have to change to keep up?
Absolutely. I think being strategic in how they see their business in the future is going to be key. Obviously, a lot of these facilities are Medicaid funded. There is some room for creativity there, but I know they're within a constraint. I think that our old models are, you know, I think the way that we provide care is going to shift. We were already seeing a little bit of niche provider care. I think we're going to see even more of that and a consolidation of that, so that you really are going to have these more, well, this is a behavioral health home, this is a Alzheimer's home, you know, and I think that with the advent of some of these technologies that can help assist with that, is going to be a great thing. And this has more to do, and this is where that think smaller, not bigger. These things can make a big difference. And this has a lot to do with workflow, staffing ratios. You know, not everybody can afford a robot. I think we've all seen the ad with the robot helping to lift somebody out of the bed, you know, as opposed to a Hoyer lift, you know, those sort of things. I think we're going to see it more in the process of how the business is run. So I think, like I said, some of those workflow issues, you're going to see some analytics come out of that. I think the way that we document so that it frees staff up to come away from their computers and actually provide patient care, it really becomes that high-touch, high-tech model that we hope for with the advent of technology entering these spaces. But I also think you're going to see a lot more start to close. We're going to see a lot of these long-term care facilities, especially the quote-unquote mom and pop shops that have owned and operated independent, smaller homes, and they may have 5 homes that they manage. I think we're going to start to see some of these close. The occupancy rate was already low. You know, I think in Colorado specifically, it was down to like in the 70s. And in certain facilities up in the mid 80s, but so no one can build new ones, so that's not really what's going to happen, obviously. But I think we'll start to see a lot more retrofitting and closing and consolidations.
And I think for me too is, you know, one thing I see is really community. Again, I still think community is really the answer to a lot of things. I think technology is a big part. I used to be an IT guy. I really love the technologies. But, you know, I'm working with a couple recently. It's just so interesting. Like one person can hear really good. This is the husband, wife. She can hear wonderfully and he can see wonderfully. But they both have deficiencies and positives. But, you know, one thing I find is the more we can come together in community, it really is create community models, like you said, like Calmos and others. And so even like what we're trying to do, well, we find like a peer support model whenever there's the ability. Take advantage of people's abilities in a community model and find out what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses, but utilize the strengths that people have. It's amazing how you can make that work. So what we're doing is we're creating that peer support model. So it's almost like a seniors helping seniors home is what that is, or you know, aging helping aging. So that way they're helping one another. But again, I think with technology too, on top of that, It really helps people live as independently as possible, but they need one another. But I don't think technology is going to be the full solution on this. But I think community is the basis and the foundation for the ways we even start building our homes and all that, and just so people have the opportunity before them with other people's strengths.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Community is huge, and I think that's going to be the driver. I think people are craving it too, after being in lockdown for 2 years. And I think it's highlighted, obviously, the social isolation piece, which we didn't really touch on a lot today, for our older adults, especially living, and not just older adults, but people living in that more institutionalized congregate care model. You know, they were craving it, and people were dying of loneliness. And so it just goes back to speaking to that, combating that, and making sure that that's built into any future model that we look at. And once we create those social and peer support models, you know, a lot of the other things can kind of fall by the wayside. And again, like I mentioned, you know, for those who are the quote unquote sickest of the sick and the neediest of the need, we will always have that. But I think that we have a real opportunity here to kind of sow that middle road.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Steve. I think that might be a good place to wrap up the hour. If you guys have any final comments, advice you would like to record into posterity.
Yeah, for me, I think, you know, it takes a village. That you hear that saying all the time. It takes a village to make this happen. I really enjoy seeing the collaboration that's come with a lot of people with their creative ideas, and it's amazing what you can come up with. And that's what makes even our nation wonderful. And just, you know, and I see it in the communities all the time. The more creativity that we have, the better. But each person plays their parts. Everyone here has gifts and talents. Let's take advantage of every single one of our talents and gifts. And I think we'll see some great things happen. I'm very optimistic for the future and where things are going.
That's great, Steve. Thank you so much. I'll leave it at that because I love the wrapping it up in a positive manner. And I think we need a little bit more of that. So absolutely 100% agree with you. And thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate it. Corey, I'll give it on over to you.
Well, if you just want to go to your last slide, I'd also like to point out that your audio has cleared up here at the 11th hour. So, all right, everybody, thank you very much for attending today. I want to let everybody know that the recording and slide deck for this will be available on the Open Minds website starting early next week. Also, we are here every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Next week, Ken Carr, Open Minds Senior Associate, is going to deliver Matchmaker. Do I need a match when M&A is the right move? He's going to run down when to consider M&A as part of your strategy, how to scout potential M&A partners, and key factors that will allow you to be successful when you partner with another organization. With that, I want to wrap it up again. Thank you again, Steve, for joining us, and thank you, Sarah, for leading the way.
Thanks, all. Bye-bye.